WRUU-LP Savannah, Georgia, 107.5 FM, WRUU.org. We are Savannah's sounding community radio with global soul. Yes, dear Drumfolk, freedom is the heart to make revolution, and thank you for joining in on our liberation ceremonies. Mission statement of the Which Way Savannah initiative, you ask? To complicate, challenge, syncopate, dismantle, contrast, dissect, and break regularly adjusted narratives, and to suggest and demonstrate that accepted or expected neutrality reproduces unequal power flows. B, to provide multiple long-range alternatives which have well-researched, relatable, and useful knowledge benefits ordinarily excluded from adjusted power flows. To assert consistent, serialized, and unapologetic countervailing narratives as normal practice. To indeed polyriddim. To C, create the spirit of Yalpin and Boona, the native and African indigenous customs of powerful discourse and dialogue accompanied by medicinal tea and coffee and social therapy. D, it is with this questioning spirit and thought world that we discover why Juneteenth is not the same as Stono commemoration, why the 4th of July can never be like a 5th of July remembrance, why 1619 pales in regards to the 1527 insurrection, and why generally freedom is the heart to make revolution. Hello, this is Dr. David Pleasant presenting Which Way Savannah. Theme of the month, A Piece of War. Which way, Savannah? And now for our Kanapaha segment, we will investigate the context of so-called peace. For many, a piece of war. If I do not subscribe to the stupid theory of white supremacy and try to hide the fact that I am a Negro for economic or any other reasons, if I do, I would be agreeing to be that being a Negro makes me inferior and that I've swallowed whole hog all of the propaganda dished out by our fascist-minded white citizens. 1945 is spoken by Savannah-born activist, writer, and social philosopher Freddie Washington. In 1967, Martin Luther King said, "I know I could never raise my voice again against the violence of the oppressed in the ghettos without first having spoken clearly to the greatest purveyor of violence in the world today, my own country." It may be inferred in the Washington quote that either peace, freedom, or liberty can be selective, exclusive, or displaced. While one enjoys them as inalienable and indivisible entitlements, others might be left with the brunt of supporting the other's enrichments and dividends at the expense of life and blood. Both quotes suggest that war violence exists even when no official war has been declared. That includes threats to the environment. Washington's quote appeared in or around World War II. It was a time not so far removed from America's Civil War and antebellum world. In fact, the tenets of Hitlerian tyranny and Nazi protocols were formed through Hitler's admiration of fundamental apartheid and genocide practice in America. During the 1930s and 1940s, intense segregation marred the U.S. At the start of World War II, Japanese were put in internment camps. Some German Americans were unjustly surveilled by the government. African and Native people, respectively, remained in ghettos and on reservations as segregated and limited in their freedoms as they had ever been. As a war against fascist tyranny raged, German POWs and Jewish refugees received benefits in America, real estate and mobility impossible for Native or African Americans to enjoy. And African and Native people, respectively, remained in reservations and ghettos as segregated and limited in their freedoms as they had ever been since slave times. Albert Einstein stated at the end of World War II, "There's a somber point in the social outlook of Americans. Their sense of equality and human dignity is mainly limited to men with white skins. I can escape complicity in it only by speaking out." In Krieger's book of Nazi protocols, America's verbatim called the class example of a country with racist legislation. Despite the well-documented tie-ins, links, and research, there are powers on both sides of the Atlantic who today wish to veil or hold back deep exposure of these facts. People such as Freddie Washington, Paul Robeson, Albert Einstein, Horace Pippin, and many others advocated for a double V campaign, victory overseas, but also victory at home against normalized racist and fascist segregation and lynching. For chattel slavery, World War II, Jim Crow, and including today's woke and eco-striving technocrats, the brunt of an intentional disconnect falls upon those who either in peacetime or on the same side peace still endure injurious war-level harm, yesterday and today. At the time of World War II and shortly after, the fight for equal rights, desegregation, and anti-lynching was at its height, leading into the civil rights and black power era. That time was a so-called peacetime. The supposed on the same side environment and friendly camaraderie is supposed to be a peacetime in place. Yet in America, with claims of liberty and justice for all, indivisible, the persistence of segregationist power skews in real estate, wealth, education, income, say-so, and etc. tell another story of fracture. So-called friendly fire exacts a toll on black, red, and brown bodies as if in a war. What we get is a peace of war. The same casualties mount as people suffer spiritual, psychological, physical, medical, nutritional, philosophical, and other damages. A peaceful and silent violence surges each day, while self-destructive violence, as an internecine reaction, draws judgment and ridicule, and then remedy through enforcement and juridical processes known to be mired in structured racist mechanisms. For instance, rulings on things like Terry or McCleskey Kemp. Fred Hampton said, "Peace if you're willing to fight for it." Savannah-born activist and human rights advocate Freddie Washington again said, "I am an American citizen, and by God, we have all inalienable rights, and wherever those rights are tampered with, there's nothing left to do but fight, and I fight." So as we see, peace has some strange entanglements with war. They are complicated and multidimensional in ways which totally push back on simplistic patriotic notions of either liberty, freedom, equality, brotherhood, camaraderie, or history. Today's guest has created a film which explores the consequences of declared war on human bodies and more. The aftermath, the supposed peacetime, offers up a specific residue of hurt and broken soldiers, broken people, while simultaneously upholding long-term war harms on certain communities as daily routine. Now we move into our Yaupen and Buna segment of the show. Following a brief station break, we will have the special guest, noted film professor and filmmaker actress Talia Lugosi, just off her film, This Is Not a War Story.
Bike Walk Savannah offers bicycle education programs for children and adults, including bicycle rodeos. Nationally certified instructors ensure that all education programs are safe, informative, and enjoyable for participants. They also offer customized programs for businesses and other organizations that are seeking to make bicycling and walking part of their employees' wellness programs. More information is available at bikewalksavannah.org.
The Live Oak Public Library System offers local residents access to hundreds of thousands of movies, television programs, albums, audiobooks, ebooks, and digital comic books for free on your streaming television and mobile devices through the Hoopla app. Supported devices include Roku, Fire, Apple TV, iPhone, and Android, among others. The selection is vast. All you'll need is your library card. Find the Hoopla app on your device and more information at liveoakpl.org.
What does it mean when we say that WRUU is a community radio station? It doesn't just mean that we invite the community to create programming, and it doesn't just mean that we are a voice for the community. It also means that we are counting on the community to keep us going, and you are the community. Almost all of our modest budget comes from small annual or monthly donations from listeners like you. You get to enjoy our community-focused programming because many others have stepped forward to do their part. Now do your part by joining our community of listener donors. Go to wruu.org right now and make a one-time or monthly donation. And thank you for supporting Savannah's community radio station, 107.5 FM.
This is the radio broadcast Way Savannah, promoting themes of escape, rebellion, and freedom through the power of indigenous community. To escape is to suggest a pathway, trail, a gateway to where or when freedom or liberty exists. Simply speaking, it is somewhere other than where you currently are. To rebel is to both demand then establish freedom when and where urgent empowerment and agency manifests itself. In other words, liberty belongs to you and you create it in the place you command. Freedom or liberty is to know in an existential circumstance with no spatial or temporal declaration that is self-evident. In short, freedom is a quality of consciousness no matter where you are, and you project it into every place you go. Today we have a special guest, noted film professor and filmmaker, actress Talia Legacy, just off of her film, This Is Not a War Story. So, Talia, what brings you to our WWS program? Who are you? What are you about? Tell me about your history.
Sure. Okay. Thanks, David. First of all, I don't know. Thank you for just asking me to talk today. It's really, really super cool. Yeah, as you said, I'm a filmmaker, and you and I met at the Beach Institute. I was researching what my next film, my follow-up film to This Is Not a War Story is going to be, and it's something that I plan to shoot in Georgia. But I've been a filmmaker for forever, it feels like. And God knows why, but I'm embarking on it again. We shall see. You know.
So how'd you get started?
Well, I fell in love with filmmaking pretty early. I was a kid. I was about 12. And the only thing I really wanted to do was watch movies over and over again. And, you know, my dad finally said, well, you know, you could take that seriously and turn it into something if you want. And I thought, that's an interesting idea. And I just sort of latched onto it, and I watched, you know, films over and over and over again. I would take one film by a director, Kubrick or something, or Oliver Stone even, or, you know, and I would just watch them repeatedly until I knew all the words. Just fascinated by how the thing was put together, and, you know, just absolutely starving to learn the craft, which I eventually did do. I made my own short films, and, you know, and then from there I made my first feature when I was 24, which is, you know, yeah, I was in a hurry for sure. It's very, very focused. And yeah, and This Is Not a War Story is my second feature. So I'm pretty proud of that. It took almost 5 years to make the film. So definitely a lot of work and a lot of collaboration involved with that.
So you're here with us today, and you know some of what WWS is about, what we've been up to, so to speak. You've seen a Juneteenth, not Juneteenth kind of programs that we're doing and all that. So why is a show like this one that has such a outright mixing together like local, social, global, cultural, geopolitical concepts, why does this kind of thing interest you? And I'm asking, of course, because I've seen your film and I see how those things like kind of stir around. And,
sure.
And
Yeah. Well, I, you know, the answer is in the question, really. I mean, how can you not be, you know, interested in those things? They're the essential things. I mean, I think any venue that will create a conversation, a platform for dialogue about these things, they must intersect. We have got to have the conversation somewhere and as often and you know as we can. And this is one of the places to do that. So, and the film itself is a conversation. I mean, that's what it's for, for all of those topics, intentionally to intersect. Yes.
Oh yeah. So in your film, you have like Chris Hedges, like right up front. Most films I've seen, with the exception of directors like maybe Usman Sendan, like Imatai, or Jean-Luc Godard, like films like The Weeknd, they don't usually make such bold and politically potent statements or presentations a part of their work. At least not that way. Right out front, mixing it up with the documentary style and kind of a cinematic narrative. What gives?
Well, I don't, other than to say it was absolutely necessary, I don't know how to characterize it. I mean, in addition to Chris Hedges, Cornel West, his voice is in there as well. People who I was utterly immersed in their work when I was making the film. And in addition to that, the veterans that I was working with are immersed in their work, very explicitly political. And it's very important, I think, in the context of shaping a narrative, to bring in all of the truthful threads that belong there to support it and to build out the world. It was important for me to make the film in a way where audiences could really participate in the world of these veterans, which is, notoriously very tight-knit and not very open to civilians and skeptical of civilians. And so the fact that we all trusted one another to make this film and embark on it, it became every single detail, as maybe as small as it may seem, was absolutely essential for me to include in the film and to make sure that audiences had a chance to participate in that and to know that these guys listen to Cornel West all day and all night, listen to Chris Hedges all day long. And these are the things that, beyond just listening to music, as they're focused on the activity of ripping uniforms and making them into paper, these are influences that matter. And yeah, I mean, it's an unusual thing. I'm glad that you see the Godard threads there, but I didn't even really think about that making the film. I really just, you don't think of those things consciously when you do stuff, and make decisions creatively. You do what's necessary for the film as it's taking shape, right? But yeah, I think that at this point in time, it makes no sense to me to make films that are aloof from the political realities of life, because we don't have that luxury anymore. And if art is going to resonate, it's going to be because people are seeing the connections between their personal life and the political. It's essential. Yeah.
Right now, we're coming off of Memorial Day in real life time, not recorded time. And it's a time when patriotism is running high. Interesting blend of myth and some history sprinkled in, excitement, and all these other kind of even spiritual things for some people. So when you use the words truth in connection with voices like Cornel West or Chris Hedges or some of the other people obviously who involved in truth telling or maybe more left-leaning dimensions of what truth is, you also have veterans who I think maybe many for the most parts have fallen into that Memorial Day kind of truth of patriotic truth, legacy of things. So how do you I guess there's a overarching commercial truth that exists on the news broadcast or on commercials that says what things mean and what they are. How do you decide, what the truth is as compared to those things when so many people are kind of pushed into a particular direction?
Well, I think, thanks for the question. I mean, I think that, look, there's a subset of veterans who are very, very anti-war. And this goes back to Vietnam, actively anti-war. And they don't get a lot of play in the mainstream media. As you said, the media tends to be, a propaganda tool. Look at Top Gun Maverick, for God's sake. I mean, people are rallying around that as if it's not really what it is, which is, propaganda for the military. I mean, they get the military's blessing to make a movie like that. Whereas we were deliberately not getting, the blessing of the Department of Defense. We were deliberately not going all of those routes that movies normally have to. For the reason that we want to represent the voices of veterans who don't have a platform to speak about why they're anti-war, why they were at one time all about the cause, a lot of them, and changed, and what that was, because that's an important part for a civilian to understand, and to see also that it's okay to have a critique of the war, and you're still supporting the people who got, involved in it for whatever reasons that they did. This would be a longer conversation, but there came a point in the, in the machinery of America, let's say, where the idea sort of came forward that if you critique the war, that means you're not supporting the soldier, and that's not so. People now have a very gung-ho attitude about, yes, it was very deliberately trying to push against that kind of propaganda. And I think that's necessary because it's not being done enough, not nearly enough, if at all,
And that kind of brings me to the next thing, like the character in your film. She's interestingly like stripped from a political cause, as it might involve like questionable U.S. policy like that in the Mideast. She's shown as, in my opinion, a human being first, raw, crippled, used, and abused. She's accountable, but at the same time, in the same instance, like a hapless pawn in the empire. Explain, refute, clarify, if you will.
Sure. I think to some extent that's true. First and foremost, the story is putting forward the rawness of who she is, because I think that's the point of entry for anybody. Any person with or without military experience can see a person who suffers and feel that. The political components come in to some degree where the realization happens that, yes, I'm a pawn in that game. However, it's more complicated than that, because there are systems in place to bring the pawns into the game. One thing that I don't know that we mention explicitly in the film, but it's pointed to often, is the poverty draft, this thing that's come to be known as the poverty draft, which is that you find recruiters only in poor and disadvantaged neighborhoods, and this is by design. Kids grow up in this country seeing that there is no way to get out of their situation other than to join the military and to look at that as a way out. And they know they're already preying upon people who have trauma going back long before it occurred to them to join the military. But I think that her political characterization is actually embedded in the fact that she was an MP. She was military police. So she, that's her identity within the military, which is very, very difficult for a number of reasons. But one of the things that the film gets very close to is the fact that she was involved in handling detainees. So there is footage, sort of night vision footage that she has in her phone that she contemplates of detainees in Iraq and how they're being treated. And that's immediately juxtaposed with an arrest, just regular, New York undercover cops arresting, two white cops arresting a young black man. And so this is in the context of the film, it's making a very, I think it's pointed, but it's easy to miss, I guess, because it's also just a visual of the fact that there is a very direct connection between the way that our military operates abroad and the way that our police operate here, and how this is all coming back home, how it really never left. I mean, there's a lot in that,
Yeah, I know it from experience, from things I've been through personally with various police actions, similar vein. While your presentation is like showing us the residue of war, a committed, declared, and monetized action by official proclamation, some believe another type of war, protracted and arguably more damaging effects. It's called peace, actually, like what we're talking about now in peacetime. And we're in the United States, and the police start acting like you're in a war and doing surveillance that way, or arresting people that way. And some wish to build upon that peace as a way of countering war But as we well know, for certain communities, such as African American communities, Native American community, more conspicuously, a casualty rate from the supposed peace mounts every day. You got health, pollution hazards, income and wealth inequality, cultural and historical omission and misrepresentation, and countless internecine damages, epigenetic problems, and PTSD-related trauma, just like a war. You know, from people being thrown in prison, arrested, beaten by police, threatened by police, or being over-surveilled. Here in Savannah, it can be seen in so-called peacetime, like during something like the the St. Patrick's Day parade, when Confederate soldier and actors, either black, white, male, or female, run up and down the street in uniform, gray uniforms with the flag, the St. George Cross, the Star and Bars, battle flags for touristic entertainment. And we might remember the Civil War only lasted 4 years, but the so-called antebellum time and this time lasts for centuries, that peacetime war, if you were to think about it that way. Your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I think it reminds me of if you take a corollary example of a family and kids who are not physically abused, they're not beaten up physically, but emotionally and mentally, they're going through all manner of trauma, but they can't put their finger on it. When you're in wartime, you know where you are. You know who the enemy is. They're facing you. Everybody's armed. You know exactly where everybody is. You know that you at some level you understand there are sides, and it's a physical battle, and there's something comprehensible about that. Whereas at a time like now, you're not really sure who's in charge, who the enemies are. Are there enemies? Like, it seems like everything's fine, or it's supposed to be. It's very confusing, and it's not quite clear that there is a war actually going on, but there is. All of this surveillance, everything you're pointing to. It just seems like because it's harder to pinpoint, I think that's part of the intent. Frankly, I think it's by design. I mean, that's a huge topic. I mean, I think I'm not doing it any justice, but it seems that way to me.
I mean, reparations itself is sort of a wartime amelioration of things. So the way people, like I was back with the reparations marches back in the 1980s with people who were clear about that and focused on it. And also reparations being way more than just money, but having these things like stop or be able to at least say, you know, we're in a situation of so-called peacetime and a friend side or same side condition, which is really wild for Black people and Native Americans in particular because of the history, and Latino people too in part. But you're in the circumstances just like this long-term crazy war because you're on the same side. So, I mean, in wars like Vietnam War and other wars too, like even the Civil War, you had same side stuff go on where these soldiers or even people who weren't soldiers who were assisting the cause, like Africa, self-emancipated African people working in the camps during the Civil War. And there was crazy rapes going on, beatings, murders, and all sorts of things. So you feel like think you are on the same side, but you're getting treatment no better than someone in a POW camp, perhaps, or on the other side. I guess best case example, like in World War II, when they had the German POWs here, and they lived in some communities where they got way better treatment in terms of civil rights and those things than any Native or African person could ever get in this country, like prior to civil rights era. In fact, that kind of stuff is what sparked civil rights era, because they saw that you get German Nazi soldiers getting land when they came back to the United States, being able to have a social life in communities where they were prisoners and African Americans couldn't walk into a dime store or a coffee shop. So it's some crazy stuff. So as you know, this segment is called Yaupin and Buna. Okay, and Yaupin engages the spirit of African, Native American cultures in a powerful discourse and dialogue accompanied by medicinal tea and coffee in a special social ceremony. Yaupin is an actual plant. A tea, a coffee-style drink was made by many native groups in the Southeast. Sometimes other ingredients were added, so it would be like an emetic. It would make the person purge all the toxins from within and serve to stimulate the creation of refresh and energized output. New speech and dialogue for community betterment generated with all the best interests in heart, soul, and mind. Then let's jump to East Africa, where we have the Buna. In East Africa, the birthplace of coffee drinking, Ethiopians created a coffee ceremony which incorporated bean roasting, inhaling the bean smells, incense burning, and drinking with robust dialogue going on. A bowl, tone, and barak were the three parts of the ceremony. Barak, the last phase, would be there, and the most energized speech would happen there. The therapeutic enhancement happened in the gathering. People could talk, adults, and parlay strong and meaningful ideas as a form of communal replenishment and grow through engaged participation. Both Yalpin and Buna are foundations of what we do here with the Which Way Savannah effort. It's acknowledged with an unashamed food is sacred ethos. It is with the same intense belief and engagement that these principles and practices as a driving ethos reignite a needed transformation here and hopefully outside of here. The great scientist and unheralded civil rights and human rights advocate Albert Einstein thought about it this way. A knowledge of the historic and philosophical background gives that kind of independence from prejudices of his generation from which most scientists are suffering. This independence created by philosophical insight and is, in my opinion, the mark of distinction between a mere artisan or specialist and a real seeker after truth. Your film hit me like a Yalpin and Buna ceremony, a Yalpin and Buna happening. It made me keep on thinking and engaging about war, peace, society, camaraderie, damage, and so forth. What do you think about Yalpin and Buna as ways of seeing, interpreting, interacting, participating, and life?
Well, damn. I mean, that's the best way I've heard the film characterized. I mean, that's the aspiration of it, is to be that kind of a centerpiece for people, for coming together. Yes, precisely. All there is to be said is that there must be more of it. Sign me up.
I mean, we're in a world of like roller coaster ride movies and Avengers and guys falling on their knee and then looking up and, that kind of thing. So, and CG regurgitated with new skins on it and that kind of stuff. And it's fun. And roller coasters are fun, and rides are fun at the circus, the fair, the carnival. Festivals are fun. Parties are great. People get together and have gatherings. Celebrations are wonderful. But there's a time for Yalpin and Buna. And people have to sit down and have these more engaged and deeper kinds of discussions and thoughts about things in an open and sort of guided way, in terms of guided meaning it doesn't turn into a breakdown, argument, a fight, but we have this great spirit of acknowledgement and growth that's just incorporated in this Buna type feel and understanding and consciousness and things. I think that's why for me, when I talk about Godard or Sinbin, they made films like that, like from a different era, 60s, 70s and all, but 80s, but it was interesting to me, especially got The Weekend, where it's like this weird documentary style, then narrative style, then it breaks from that and goes into this kind of cinema thing, bringing in, Alice in Wonderland characters. And one of the people in the film kills Alice in Wonderland, and it makes all of these very strange and powerful statements that are disjointed seemingly, but they actually go together to do nothing else, just to shake people up. So then you don't fall into something. I'm a drummer, of course, a certain kind of groove that displaces you from deeper, more what I call polymetric or polyrhythmic thought. That is where you can bring in different perspectives on things, and you aren't guided by a director. You're seeing a film that works almost like a book. Yes. Stuff, and you can look at another part of the screen. You can see some of the background that relates, and you just have all this cinematic stuff working. Then you get the dialogue, and it creates something magnificent. Again, the roller coaster is great, the rides are great, but you got to have stuff like that too. The point of that is to say, here in this city, Savannah, there's a lot of touristic travel and leisure, hospitality stuff, and it's done with an entertainment sort of thing, entertainment protocol on it, and there are great rides, there are attractions. Maybe there's a place for that, but when you start conflating those things with more serious topics, history, slavery, emancipation, freedom, insurrection, actual liberty, parsing liberty, and a liberty somebody tells you and then don't do nothing about it for 100 years, that kind of stuff, you can't really come to that like you're going to see the Avengers or getting on a roller coaster and it's a ride for fun or an attraction. And that goes to the slavery part too, because it can fall into the same. people can start talking about slavery in a way that gets victimization and suffering and immiseration a kind of theatrical quality to it, or this macabre sense, like talking about size of the trees, moss and hangings and stuff like that, or a contribution thing where it's about, what we contributed but still don't control, what we contributed but still are marginalizing, what we contributed but we don't do enough to fight against, what we contributed, whereas the people who benefited from the contributions could care less about sharing that in an equal and just way. Your final thoughts about all that stuff I said.
so many thoughts going in many directions about all of that. So much truth in there. But look, I think that the roller coaster is fine until it becomes, a trap to keep you in the same mindset, generation after generation. And I think that that's sort of what, pop culture kind of has always been. And so that becomes the job of the artist, the drummer, the filmmaker to push against and to wake up as much as possible. And part of the way that you do that is to tell unexpected stories, to pull together threads that don't normally go together, show something in a way that is directed, but at the same time, it requires the conversation of the audience to participate with the work in order to become what it's intending to become. It's not complete without the audience. It's not complete without their thoughts and their conversations. That's the point. And so I think it's not something that has to be serious and somber so much as it can be utterly exhilarating. I mean, some of the greatest conversations I've ever had have been just riffing off of either the making of the film while it was happening, in preparation to it, or all of the conversations that have followed from it, so I think sometimes people are, skeptical or resistant of, films that don't behave like the Avengers, or music that doesn't behave the way that they expect it to. But rather than see it as something that is something to kind of look like it's a long Tolstoy-sized book and no one wants to read it. On the contrary, it's the thing that it really, if you engage it honestly, will utterly wake up parts of your mind and your heart that are utterly crying out for this kind of engagement in life and presence, and connection to people. And that's what it's all for. If there's any hope to be found anywhere.
The character you had going too, like really, that was great, because you couldn't from a popular film standpoint, you could never have, oh, well, she's going to do that next. Oh, now she's going to, she's going to fall down on one knee and jump up and kick somebody, or whatever. And then you never really gave that. You gave this really complex human being person with this range of emotions. She wasn't, from a situation where something happened. Now she's angry all the time, or she's sad all the time, or she's just, crazy and elated all the time. She went through this range of emotion and interaction with, I don't remember the character's name, but the friend that she had, the person she befriended.
Will, yeah.
And it was this kind of conversation that was going on, and you could kind of see her thinking through or feeling stuff and showing the feelings, but it could never fall into like some category that you could just, clamp down on. How'd you come about that?
Well, that's what life is. I mean, that's how life appears to me, in my experience. That's not how movies are generally, and shows, and the bad and the good ones to some degree. I mean, the good quote, they have this sort of categorical definitions of who's who and when, and this utter falsity that human beings have this like consistency where they would only respond a certain way to some things, and they can't act out of character. It's just mind-numbingly predictable. Whereas if you look around at life and you just observe, you just listen to the way people talk, and you just feel into how people are, and you yourself, you will see that there's just this range, this constant, just hills and valleys and everything going on in the human heart. And I'll just let it be there. All I did was not interfere. All I did was not force them to be a certain way or to do a certain thing. And I think when you have typical plot-driven type of movies, that the forcing of qualities that are not human tend to happen. And I think it's a very unhealthy reflection. One needs to see more just regular human beings, not contrivances and not fantasies, in order to feel like you're part of the world. If you see a false narrative about healing and how great it is that you can finally heal, you can't. Because you in your own life are like, how come I can't do what those people are doing? They went through something tough and they got through it, and they changed. And it's like, that's so false. And it's so dangerous. It's so alienating. Why do that to people? Not necessarily,
Wow. I like that. So thank you immensely for being here and showing up for this and talking about your film, your work, life, all these different aspects, and for your presence and participation. Maybe you'll visit us on your next film and we can talk about some other wonderful therapeutic cinema.
Absolutely. Yeah. Thank you so much, David. I really.
In our next segment, we have the WWS-generated program, Ecocultural Concepts, a news and commentary profile of multidimensional ecological meaning in our world. Our standard lineup of guest presenters are Rob Kaiser, Dr. Simona Perry, Laura Shadley. On this broadcast, Dr. Simona Perry will expound on the dangers of avoiding the grander spiritual meaning of water.
How does holy water become holy? Well, as I recently learned in the Roman Catholic tradition, it is through what is known as a rite of minor exorcism, or what are known as prayers that are used to break the influence of evil and sin in a person's life. And also it turns out to sanctify that water as holy. In this ancient rite, a priest blesses the living creature of water to cast out devils, put sickness to flight, and let the hidden enemy depart. Ni Wakoni, water is life, as the Lakota people of Standing Rock reminded all of us. Divine creature, holy water exists irrespective of our religious traditions, cultures, or the absence of such traditions. On April 6, 2022, the United States Supreme Court granted an emergency order related to the Clean Water Act. With that decision, with that emergency order, the oil and gas industry gained the right to continue developing new fossil fuel infrastructure. In a 5-4 vote, SCOTUS stayed a decision by a California court that had overruled a 2020 revision of the Clean Water Act's 401 rule. Developers of oil and gas infrastructure, mines, and dams can now continue polluting without the oversight of state or tribal governments. With little regard for local community rights to clean water and livable ecosystems, water becomes less than holy. Instead, it becomes barely potable, is undrinkable. It kills instead of providing life. Originally, the Clean Water Act's 401 rule was designed to reduce and manage the discharge of pollutants into our nation's water through more local oversight. It's hardly perfect, but it did allow for state and tribal oversight and stop the most blatant water pollutants from being dumped into rivers and lakes. In 2020, the Trump administration issued a new rule that eliminated that oversight provision of the 401 rule. The California court's decision meant that there was a temporary return to the 1971 Clean Water Act rule until the EPA finalized a new rule that would ensure states and tribes were once again empowered to protect and manage water quality. But on April 6th of this year, the Supreme Court's order meant that water belongs again to the developers, with no regard for public health, ecosystem resilience, and overall community well-being. In their reply in support of their application for a stay pending appeal, Louisiana, Arkansas, Mississippi, Missouri, Montana, West Virginia, Wyoming, Texas, the American Petroleum Institute, the Interstate Natural Gas Association of America, and National Hydropower Association claimed that for the 50 years prior to the 2020 rule, they were harmed and have now been harmed again since the California court ruling. The main claim for harm in their reply is that developers seeking to construct pipeline infrastructure, hydropower facilities, mines, and other development projects should not have to consider and respond to issues of water protection raised by local communities, landowners, state environmental agencies, and tribal governments, or on any ancillary non-water quality related concerns. That includes things such as treaty rights and obligations, public health, ecosystem resilience, climate change impacts, and the recreational and aesthetic enjoyment of our public waterways. These interested parties provided not a single drop of concrete evidence of a project being stopped or disallowed as a result of the California court's ruling. As Justice Elena Kagan wrote in her dissent to the emergency order, this is simply not irreparable harm. The court's decision illuminates a cliff where humanity hangs in the balance, as corporations' insatiable greed and government complicity push us to our deaths and diseases and the livability of our planet, including human and non-human life. Some have already fallen to their death, and we are collectively hanging over the edge. And as we dangle on this cliff, greed-induced destabilization and destruction of our necessary life support systems, our water, our air, our soil, and our food, have the potential to bring down our current economic, social, and political systems at an extremely rapid rate. As Derek Jensen and other environmentalists have queried, would it be such a terrible thing for the planet if systems reliant on fossil fuels, extractive mining, slave labor, concentration of wealth, exponential growth, waste, and political corruption were to fail? Most days we are bystanders, wondering which system will collapse first, our planet's life support ecosystems or our human-constructed and oppressively maintained systems. For our collective survival, my dream and my hope is that these oppressive systems collapse first, if we are to have any hope of saving our environmental life support systems. But if these 8 states and corporate lobbyists who sought the return of the 2020 Clean Water Act rule get their way, collapsing our life support systems looks like it might happen first. Profit-maximizing business winning out over our collective right to clean water is alarming on its own. But what makes this an unprecedented alarm is the fact that the states and industry groups who won this emergency order did so through the use of what's called this emergency or shadow docket. Staying the California decision was granted at lightning speed and with as little transparency as possible, since no written justification for the final decision is required in an emergency docket. As Justice Kagan wrote in her dissent, in this decision the court goes astray. It provides a stay pending appeal and thus signals its view of the merits, even though the applicants have failed to make the irreparable harm showing we have traditionally required. That renders the court's emergency docket not for emergencies at all. Kagan goes on to say the docket becomes only another place for merits determinations. The part of the corporate world seeking profit at the expense of our clean water are, quoting United Nations Secretary General Antonio Guterres, the true radicals, and full of their own economic and moral madness. I would argue further and note that these corporations are the unholy ones, and their political accomplices, the hidden enemy. In this Holy Week past 2022, we also saw the fasting month of Ramadan during April and the liberatory commemoration of Passover. This should be and should have been a collaborative time to remind ourselves that it is our duty to revere holy water, honor sacred creation, protect life, reaffirm our rights as human beings, and protect the rights of nature and non-human beings from any action that seeks to enable the destruction of life. This ritual of honoring the sacredness and holiness of water and all life crosses all faiths and serves as a damning reminder that the governments and judges who do the bidding of corporations in their moral and economic madness are pushing us and themselves rapidly over the cliff's edge. My question to all of us is who will be there to save us as well as them?
From the ecocultural space of the Kanapaha, to Yaupan and Buna, to escape rebellion and freedom. Freedom is the heart to make revolution. Next month, we explore oneness versus completeness. What does community mean when camaraderie or loyalty outweigh ethical standards, when identity, inclusion, or diversity supersedes genuine liberty and justice? So that's it for now. Peace, power, and revolution. Which way, Savannah?